Hello everyone, welcome back to MalStorm Gaming. My name is Malachi Gardner, and today I'm going to be reviewing BattleCon. And then, more specifically, I'm going to be reviewing the solo cooperative BattleQuest variant for BattleCon. So with that in mind, I'm going to be splitting this video into two parts. The first part is going to be me talking about BattleCon in a more general way, where I'm just talking about what I think of BattleCon as a game. Then the second part is going to be me talking about the BattleQuest game mode and my thoughts on that specifically. And then I'll give my final rating on both how I think of BattleCon as a multiplayer game, and then how I think of BattleCon as a solo game with the BattleQuest game mode. So what do I think of BattleCon as a multiplayer head-to-head fighting game? Well, I really like BattleCon. Now you may remember me talking about BattleCon and saying that it was my #1 multiplayer game of 2020, and that is very true. I really like BattleCon as a multiplayer head-to-head game. So I really like how you know every single possible thing your opponent could do, in theory. You know every single card that's in his hand, all the cards in his discard pile, and what he could possibly do. The one thing you don't know is what he's going to do. So you know what he could do, not what he's going to do. And so that's very interesting to me because it's kind of like chess, where you see everything on the board. It's all open information, everything's laid out, and you have to use your knowledge of what you think the opponent's going to do so that you can take the correct move. And another thing I really like is, unlike chess, where you all have the same pieces, everyone has the same number of pawns, rooks, bishops, knights, everything like that, in this, you all have a different toolkit. For the most part, you all are going to have the same set of bases. You all have your shot, your burst, your strike, and your grasp, and everything like that. You all can do the same things, except you each also have your own unique base that you have that you're going to be able to do, and this is going to be unique per character. And then on top of that, you each have a set of styles that will impact how each of those bases work, because each turn you're going to be playing one base and one style, and those are going to go together to create a unique attack pair. And so if we're going to stick with our chess analogy, it's almost as if we both have knights, but our knights have slightly different rules. My knight is a little bit faster than yours, your knight's a little bit more powerful. That's how those bases feel when they're mixed together with the styles. And so I think that's just a really interesting system that makes it slightly easier to learn a new character. Because there's the same set of basic abilities that you're able to do, you're just adding on new stuff per character, but there's always the same core for every character. That makes it a little bit easier to learn characters. But on top of having your unique base and all of your unique styles, each character is also going to have a unique ability. And this is something that is just super cool to me. Each character has some sort of special thing about them that makes them feel extra unique. You have one character who has all these different tokens that they can ante to empower their attacks with different elemental abilities. So you can use fire attacks and ice attacks and earth and wind, and it's just very interesting. And then you have the character that I used in my playthrough, which was Clint Hyde, and he has those different stims that he's able to use, and he gets passive stat bonuses from those, but the longer he has those active, the more life he's going to lose. And those are just two of the, I think there's like 100 characters that can be purchased through expansions and different things like that. So each one of those 100 plus characters have their own unique ability that goes on top of all of their unique styles and their unique base that integrates with the common pool of bases to create a very unique fighter. And I think that is just super cool, and you need to really know your fighter and your opponent's fighter to be able to play effectively, and that's just something that I find really cool. Now, one thing that you must take into consideration is that even though I just said that one thing that I thought was very interesting about the game is how each character is so unique, and you need to learn each character and how they work in order to play efficiently, that's also a major negative with this game. So based off who you are, this might be more negative or more positive for you. So for me, I really like how different each of the characters are, and I enjoy trying to look at a character and see what is the most effective way to play this character in general, and then specifically against this other character that my opponent's bringing to the table. I find that very interesting, and it allows you to keep coming back to the game time after time and seeing how to counter different characters, seeing how to coming back time after time, seeing how to use new characters and how to counter those characters based off of what tools you have at your disposal. Now this might be a huge negative for some people where they might not want to have to keep coming back and keep learning new characters and how they work. And so for someone like that, you might feel terrified when you hear that there's over 100 of these characters that each have their own special rules. So you could purchase one of these smaller sets, like the Fate of Indy set or the Wanderers of Indy set. I think there's another one, I think it might be the Trials of Indy set. And those each have 10 characters, so that's a much more manageable number rather than Devastation of Indy's 32 characters, or something much larger like that. So you're able to just pick one of these sets and just use those 10 characters in there, and that could be much better. But still, even with just 10 characters, you still have a lot to learn and a lot to keep track of when you are dealing with the different combinations of characters. To make this game really shine, you need to have several other people who are willing to spend time mastering each of the different characters and how they interact with the other characters in the game. So that's just something you really need to keep in mind. So for me, it's a really major positive that each of the characters are so different and bring so much unique stuff to the table, as that just keeps making me come back for more. But for other people, this could be a huge negative that could just ruin your experience entirely. So that's just something you really need to keep in mind, because it could be a make or break situation for this game. So what makes this game really shine for me is that you see all the things that your opponents could do, and you see all the things that you could do, and you really need to think. It becomes like a mind game. What do you think your opponent's going to do? Okay, it's probably this combination of it, style and base, because this is the most effective for this situation. So what attack pair would defeat this style and base? So that's the one you could choose. But of course, your opponent could know that this attack pair is the most effective for the situation, and so they might pick something else. And you're really just trying to predict what your opponent's going to do, and you need to be able to counter that, or maybe you just want to do something completely different and hope it works. So it's very interesting, and I like how you kind of have to program your moves, and after you select your attack pair, you're going to do a simultaneous reveal. It's going to go off. Some attack pairs do give you some flexibility as to changing your plans after you reveal your cards, but in general, you're just kind of stuck. And so you really need to think about what you're going to do before you play it, because you only have 20 health, and many of these attacks are able to do 4 or 5 damage, so you really do need to be careful. And that actually brings me to my next point that I really like with this game. I really like how fast it is. Each game is just so fast. You each have 20 life, and again, like I said, you're really able to do like 4 or 5 damage in a turn, no problem. It all depends on your character, of course, but you're often able to do 4 or 5 damage, and so the game's just going to go by very quickly, and then you can do a best out of 3 or whatever. It's just very fast and very fun. So those are some of my thoughts on BattleCon as a multiplayer game. As you can see, I really like BattleCon, but of course I did point out a couple things like the complexity and all the different characters that could definitely be off-putting to some people, but for me, that just makes me enjoy the game even more. Now, what do I think of the game as a solo cooperative game in the BattleQuest game mode? So I've not actually tried the BattleQuest game mode for more than one person, although I have controlled multiple characters going through it. So the BattleQuest is, of course, trying to create a game mode that would allow you to play solo or cooperative. And how do I think it did at that? It's kind of a mixed bag. So the system for controlling the enemies is very simple. So you're randomly going to select an action for the enemy to take based off of a random token draw. These tokens are numbered 1 through 6, and so then all of the abilities are also numbered 1 through 6. And so you could have an ability that if you draw a 1, this goes off. You have another ability that's, if it's a 2 through 3, then you do this. If it's a 4, you do this. If it's a 5 through 6, you do this. So each enemy type is going to have 1 to 6 abilities based off of the complexity of that monster. It's all going to be based off of these tiles that you draw. And after each round, you're going to shuffle all the tiles and reveal a new one for the next round. So you're always going to have the 6 tiles. There's no like discard pile cycling that you're going to have going on with the enemies. It's a very simple system where you have these tiles and you're drawing a random one each round. So that takes a game that is all perfect information, no randomness, and adds randomness to it, which does change the experience quite a bit because, well, now there's randomness. Now, is there any way that you could have no randomness in a solo variant for BattleCon or any game like this? I would say no, because you need to have some sort of mystery so that you don't know exactly what the enemy is going to do. If it was randomless, then you'd have to have some sort of flowchart, and you'd actually be able to just calculate that while you're selecting your attack pair and perfectly counter all of the enemy's moves. So it wouldn't actually be that great of an experience. So you do need to have the randomness, but it is completely random. So there's no reaction. The enemies, they act, and they're going to act based off of a random ability that's drawn each round, but there's no reaction that goes on whatsoever. They might draw a token by chance that will mess up your moves, but it's not any reaction, it's all acting. So it feels kind of like a flat experience almost. It just doesn't have the same depth that playing a two-player does, where you're not entirely sure what your opponent's going to do, but you kind of have an idea. It's just completely random. Now, you do have some abilities that trigger off of multiple token draws, and so then you know that that ability is more likely to happen, so you could try to counter that ability. But other than that, there's not really much of any direction based off of what they do. I wish that there was some sort of system in place where you had different abilities that the enemy could possibly use based off of your criteria. For example, if you were like 2 spaces away from the enemy during the planning phase, then they would use one of these 3 abilities, and then if you had less than 10 health, they'd use one of these 3 abilities. Just a list of criteria and then abilities so that the enemy would react to the board state. So that would allow the game to still have that mystery of, I don't know what the enemy's going to do, but you have more focus. You have the ability to be able to predict a little bit, even just a little bit, of what the enemy is going to do, and then you could counter that. But then again, they could do something that would be completely different and surprise you. But I just wish there was just a little bit more. I think the system for the AI is very simple, but it doesn't always give you that engaging gameplay that the 2-player game gives you. So with all that said, there's of course the question, do I actually recommend BattleCon for solo gamers? And so I think the answer to that question is no. But there's a caveat. So I would not recommend BattleCon to a solo gamer who is looking to add a new solo game to their collection to play solo. But I would recommend BattleCon to someone who would at least have one person that they could regularly play BattleCon with. If you're going into this wanting to play BattleCon 100% solo, you're probably going to be disappointed in the lack of depth in the solo mode. I think there's plenty of content there for you to keep coming back in terms of trying out new fighters and going through the 6 different dungeons inside the game. But in terms of the AI and the engagement you get from the solo mode, but in terms of the enemies and how they act in their AI, it's just not on par with the base game, and it can be very disappointing at times with just how shallow it feels. But if you're someone who had at least one other person that they could play BattleCon with, at least semi-regularly, and you just wanted to have the BattleQuest for your backup, for if you want to play BattleCon more than your gaming partner is able, then you can do this, and I think you'll have some fun with it. You can almost think of the BattleQuest as a light snack. It's not going to be your full BattleCon meal. That's going to be when you're playing with your actual human friend, which is a thing that some people actually have. So my final verdict for the BattleCon BattleQuest game mode would be that while it is simple and easy to use, it does not have satisfying enough gameplay to warrant purchasing for solo play only. But if you had at least one other person who would be able to regularly play BattleCon with you, then I would recommend getting the BattleQuest game mode, which is found in the Devastation of Indies expansion, just to allow you to play BattleCon solo in between game sessions of BattleCon. For my ratings of the game, I would say that BattleCon as a 2-player head-to-head fighting game is a 9 out of 10, and I really enjoy it. And as I said in my top 5 multiplayer games of 2020, it is my favorite multiplayer game as of 2020 and still early on into March 2021. And so I really enjoy multiplayer. But as a solo game, the BattleQuest game mode gets a 5 out of 10 from me. It's fine, but just fine. It's not anything particularly special, and it's not really something I'd recommend purchasing BattleCon Devastation Indies for specifically, unless, again, you had at least one other person to play BattleCon with regularly. And in that case, you should definitely go ahead and purchase the Devastation Indies expansion for BattleCon so that you can have the BattleQuest, which would allow you to play solo when your human friend is not available. I hope that you enjoyed this video and it was helpful to you as you decided whether or not BattleCon would be a good fit for you solo. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking this video and then subscribing to MalStorm Gaming and hit that bell icon so that you are notified whenever I upload new content. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a great day. Happy gaming! But I would recommend BattleCon to someone who wants to play Gloom, which is going to be playing BattleCon with an actual human friend, which I've heard is a thing.